that quantum physics is both pointing at the dreamlike nature and it's an expression of the very dreamlike nature that it's pointing at. And it's showing us this incredible creative power that we have. As we take that in, I'm actually, trying to make clear that that's the real gift of quantum physics.
Keep watching to learn more. You can now download all 9 copies of the New Thinking Aloud magazine for free or order beautiful printed copies. Go to newthinkingaloud.org. New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu.
Book 4 in the New Thinking Aloud dialogue series is Charles T. Tart, 70 Years of Exploring Consciousness and Parapsychology, now available on Amazon.
Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today, we'll be exploring the magic of quantum physics. My guest is Paul Levy, who works with groups and individuals from a Jungian perspective. His website is awakenindthedream.com. He is the author of The Madness of George W. Bush, Dispelling Wetiko, Awakened by Darkness, and most recently, The Quantum Revelation, a radical synthesis of science and spirituality. That will be the topic of our discussion today. This is an internet interview, and now I'll switch over to the internet video. Welcome, Paul. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be here, Jeffrey. Thank you so much.
This will be our third interview, and now we're going to dig into the work you've done on quantum physics. I know that studying physics, even though you're not a physicist, has been a passion of yours for a long time.
Totally, yeah. And I'm so glad you clarified that. I'm completely not a physicist. I'm just an ordinary person. But how come I got so interested in quantum physics was based on these experiences I began having in 1981, in which stuff began happening in my life that was pretty impossible, that could only happen in dreams, that weren't supposed to be able to happen in this world that I was inhabiting. And I didn't realize it then fully. I still don't realize it fully, but I was being shown something about the nature of things and the nature of myself. And then over the years, as I, like everybody would read the Tao of Physics or just books like that, I began all of a sudden to have the recognition that, oh my God, what quantum physics is describing, it really helped me to make sense of this world that I had found myself in. And so at a certain point, I just went so down the rabbit hole of quantum physics that it really, it helped me to integrate what I was experiencing. So that's really the deeper context for how I came across quantum physics.
Let me go to one of the opening statements of your book that really caught my eye. You said that writing the book itself, The Quantum Revelation, was an act of ceremonial magic.
Yeah, totally. In the sense that it was not like, oh, I had this understanding and let me just, put it in words. No, the act of actually finding the words and, creating the book was the very thing that was deepening the realization that I was having. So, and that to me sort of made it some form of creative artwork, which is like magic, because by doing that, I was literally transforming myself. And that's what magic is, as well as transforming the whole universe that I was inhabiting. So yeah, it was not an ordinary, it was not just an ordinary act. For me, it felt like a spiritual practice, what I was doing, really.
You point out in your book that when we take a good hard look at quantum physics, and you quote any number of eminent physicists who themselves use the word magic to describe physics, we're dealing with something metaphysical, and by its very nature, that awakens us to contemplate our own spirit and the far reaches of the human mind itself.
As I really began to study what the founding fathers, what their experience was in encountering quantum physics, it was like the floor had gotten pulled out from under them. Up until that moment, they thought they were studying, in the classical universe, before quantum physics came on the scene. They thought there was this objective world and they were just passive observers who were trying to understand it. And all of a sudden, they had this realization that they hadn't bargained for. In other words, there are a lot of ways of saying it, but all of a sudden, the factor of consciousness had entered into the physics lab and entered into their equations, and they didn't know what to do with that. That wasn't what they had signed up for. And so it's so, for the ones who really were the real physicists, in other words, who were after the truth and didn't have preconceptions and were following whatever little thread, was interesting to them, they opened up, this world where the idea of the physical world and the spiritual world, or just the world of mind or consciousness, that became indistinguishable. And so for them, as they began to explore what they were discovering through quantum physics, it was changing them. It was changing their consciousness. And that's, 100 years ago, that's not what your typical academic corporate physicist had signed up for. So it really was confronting them with these deep metaphysical issues. And it was challenging them, to come to terms, in a sense, with who they are. And that's one of the things that I want to talk about, that quantum physics promoted itself to the surprise of the physicists to actually be a spiritual path. And that was, either that was the physicist's worst nightmare or their highest dream. It's unclear, but that wasn't what they had expected, that all of a sudden what they were discovering in quantum physics was shedding light on the nature of who we are.
And now Einstein famously resisted quantum physics. I'm not sure he ever really accepted it.
That is true. Now, he was one of the founding fathers of quantum physics. But he, as I deepened my study, I learned that he was really attached to that there was an objective world. And he couldn't let go of that idea. And that's what quantum physics was basically shedding light on, so as to empirically prove that that's a nonsensical idea, that it's a false idea. There is no such thing. It's just that. It's just an idea. It has no correlate to reality. And Einstein just couldn't let go of that, because in his mind, what science was all based on that there was an objective world and we were trying to study it and understand it. So, he took it to his grave that he just couldn't really get his mind around what quantum physics was actually, showing us.
It's true. People who look at quantum physics theoretically agree with you for the most part that the idea of a subjective objective distinction is an artifact. It's not real. On the one hand, on the other hand, we have all this technology, computers and cell phones and radios and televisions and on and on and on that are clearly to the average person, examples of objective world technology that stem from quantum physics.
Yes, that's true. And the real cutting edge physicists are saying all of those technologies that have changed the world and changed the course of history, that's the low hanging fruit, that's less than 1% of the benefits that quantum physics is offering us, and that the real benefits is in our mind, is in our consciousness, that it's actually showing us, in a sense, who we are and the nature of how our consciousness actually plays a major part in the creation of the universe. So with all those incredible technologies, that's just sort of the minor stuff. And because, just to understand, I mean, for people who aren't overly familiar with quantum physics, here before quantum physics came on the scene 100 years ago, or a little bit more, like I was saying, the classical physicists thought they were studying an objective world. Quantum physics comes along, shows, it proves beyond a shadow of doubt, there is no such thing. And not only that the act of observing the world actually influences the universe that we're observing. The observer effect is what that's called. That's the rabbit hole. As soon as I became familiar with that, I realized, oh my God, that's the rabbit hole that, just opens up everything about what I'm really interested in. Because that idea that the act of observing the universe actually affects the universe, that's exactly like a dream. Because quantum physics is empirically proving, and maybe a lot of physicists, I'm not a physicist, but I'm just a curious person, and I know about, I connect with my dreams and was having this experience of the dreamlike nature of this reality, and I was realizing, oh my God, quantum physics is describing the dreamlike nature of reality. Quantum physics, it has empirically proven beyond the slightest shadow of a doubt that we are having a collectively shared dream. And what that's mind-blowing, because it's basically saying that the act of observing each and every moment, the act of us observing this universe is creative, that we're not that the act of observation is not just a passive act, but we're actually creating moment by moment our experience of ourselves and our experience of the world. And that's like pointing at, the incredible, and it's sort of, to the majority of us, it's untapped creative power. We carry this unbelievable creative potency. And because we're unconscious of it, we're, implementing it unconsciously to the most part in a way that's destroying us. And that's being writ large in the greater body politic of the world on the world stage. And quantum physics, when you actually, because, it's so controversial, as everybody has their own theory of what it means. And here, I'm not a physicist, but I'm just saying, well, wait a second. If you look at it this way, if you have the recognition that it's reflecting that quantum physics is both pointing at the dreamlike nature and it's an expression of the very dreamlike nature that it's pointing at, and it's showing us this incredible creative power that we have. As we take that in, I'm actually, trying to make clear that that's the real gift of quantum physics, that if we can gain insight individually and with other people who are also tapping into this and begin to understand, wow, it's like quantum physics has come on the scene and it's actually reflecting back to us this unimaginable creative power that all of us have, that can change evolution. That's evolutionary, and that can change the course of human history. And it all depends if we have the recognition of what it's actually showing us.
Now, I have to say this, Paul, I agree with your interpretation. I know in the introduction to your book, you have some physicists commenting, and they agree with your interpretation. And you cite many of the great founders of quantum physics to support your point. But I would wager that if we were to go into the physics departments of most colleges and universities and do a survey of average practicing physicists and professors, instructors of physics, and people who work in cyclotrons and other physics laboratories, only a small percentage would acknowledge what you've just said.
Yeah, and that's true. And that to me is just mind blowing. And but it points to something. It points to even, the most brilliant of the academic corporate physicists, are still entrained in the duality of subject object, in the fact that this isn't a dream. And so it's like being under a spell. And here's the thing. So say if I'm a corporate academic physicist, right? And I'm in I'm in this collective dream phenomena like we're all sharing right now. But if I'm that corporate academic physicist, and if I hold a viewpoint that this is not a dream, and well, guess what? The dream, being a reflection of the very mind that's observing it, is going to then shapeshift and instantaneously, in no time at all, faster than we can think or blink, reflect back to us all the evidence confirming our viewpoint that this world is objective. So now we have evidence confirming the seeming rightness and objectivity of our viewpoint. As that academic physicist, I'm holding the viewpoint that this is an objective world, that it's not a dream. And then I get more fixed in my viewpoint, so I see it even more as being not a dream and objective. And the more I see it that way, the more then this dreamlike universe reflects back all the evidence confirming my viewpoint. So the actual nature of the dream confirms to them that this isn't a dream. And another way of translating that is they've actually hypnotized themselves via the creative genius and the creative potency of their own mind in a way that they've become unconscious. And that's in essence what I'm pointing at, that quantum physics, when you actually contemplate it in the way that I'm pointing at, can help to see through that and can help to unlock that. So what I'm basically saying is that for those, and you're totally right, those, amazing, people in technology and engineers and physicists who are part of corporate academic physics, very many of them are actually under a trance whose origin, interestingly enough, is in their own mind. And then thankfully there are some who are on the cutting edge, who are just having real integrity to follow what the universe is showing us. And they're the ones who are beginning more and more to suspect, wow, this is some sort of a dream. And thankfully there are, many, many physicists, who are actually getting switched on to that.
I think another way of phrasing what you've just said is that quantum physics now tells us, and many other sources tell us as well, you cite Tibetan Buddhist teachers, for example, the universe is so very, very magical that people who don't want it to be magical can use the power of their mind to banish magic from their worldview.
Exactly. And that reminds me, in Tibetan Buddhism, there's a teaching, and it's actually this hidden treasure, which I want to talk about in a little bit. And what this treasure says, and I've essentialized it into 4 words, is as viewed, so appears. As viewed, so appears, right? That's the actual teaching in this, hidden treasure in Tibetan Buddhism. And you think about that, that's like the precise articulation of how we create reality and of the nature of a dream. That as you view something, being that a dream is nothing other than a reflection of your own mind, if you're holding a viewpoint, then the dream has no choice but to actually just reflect back the very viewpoint you're holding. And if you're not awake to that process, then you become entranced by your own mind in such a way that, like you were just saying, our great power to call forth reality gets turned against us in a way that's actually killing us. And that's this process that I'm talking about in the microcosm in each of us as individuals is getting played out writ large on the world stage in such a way that we're destroying the biosphere, the life support system of the planet, which is we're committing this suicide, this collective suicide. And it's all because we're not switched on to this genius power that we all have. And what I'm basically saying, in essence, is that quantum physics comes along. And if you look at it in a certain way, it's like reflecting this back. And it's giving us insight into the very medicine that we need to wake up.
I did find in your book, in a footnote, only mentioned briefly, but there is an alternative, a strong alternative explanation, the many worlds interpretation of Everett, which suggests that it's really not consciousness that creates all of this. What's really going on is that at any given moment, the universe is splitting into zillions of parallel universes so that everything is actually happening all at once.
Yeah, well, that's really interesting because one way that I try to understand that, so here quantum physics is trying to understand what is the building blocks of this universe, what is the microstructure, and so say you have a quantum entity, the most elementary particle, and quantum physics has discovered that elementary particle, before it's observed, it exists in a state of every and any potentiality that it ever could exist in, but in potential. And then here comes an observer, and the observer observes that quantum entity, and all of a sudden it actualizes into particular manifestation in 3D space-time, and all the other actualities, they just disappear as if they never existed, or you could say they exist in a parallel world. And that experience, we're threading ourselves moment by moment through that universe, where each moment, by the way we're observing, where the wave function is getting collapsed, each moment that those infinite or close to infinite potentialities actualize into whatever particular manifestation in such a way that we then entrance ourselves into thinking that the world we're experiencing is objective, separate from us, that it's continuous, where quantum physics is saying, no, each moment this universe is recreating itself anew every moment. And even though it appears to have a continuity and a solidity, it's actually, recreated out of the void every nanosecond. And the key factor, though, I, really want to emphasize in that whole process is consciousness.
Well, you talk about the principle of complementarity in physics, which suggests that on the one hand, the universe recreates itself moment by moment, and these are very, very tiny, fast moments. Planck time, I suppose, is one way to put it. But on the other hand, every point in the universe, every wave and particle is intimately connected with every other wave and particle all the time. And to add to the confusion, according to Einstein's theory of relativity, a photon traveling at the speed of light experiences no time at all. So one might well say, along with Immanuel Kant, the great philosopher, that time and space are illusions too, created by our nervous system.
Yeah, and that's one thing that I talk about that in the book, that there are constructs of the mind in a certain way. And the thing which is interesting about what you were just saying is that the quantum universe there's a seamless wholeness. It's not made of separate parts. So there's not even an example of the observer effect. It's not, there's the observer, there's the object observed, and there's the act of observation, and there are separate, entities interacting. No, in a quantum world, and keep in mind that quantum physics has discovered that this universe that we inhabit is quantum on all scales, that it's quantum through and through. So in a sense, we are quantum entities ourselves. And so there's this sense of interconnectedness. It's not like, the idea that, here's light and it has the speed limit of 186,000 miles per second. In the quantum world, it's like, it's this non-local world in that the laws of three-dimensional space-time are transcended, and every part of the universe is interconnected and inseparable and undivided from every other part of the universe. And so that's really, one of the fundamental understandings that quantum physics is bringing in, and the implications of that are just amazing. And if I could just say one thing about quantum physics being a spiritual path, because it's so profound. So here I was talking about that the rabbit hole is understanding that there's no such thing as an objective, not only world, but objective anything. And there's no such thing as things. that exist intrinsically independently in and of themselves, that everything is interdependent and interconnected. And an example being, I don't exist as a intrinsically existing independent entity just from my own side, separate from anybody else, but I exist relative to you, for example, Jeffrey. And so, but you don't exist as an independent, intrinsically existing objective entity in and of yourself. You only exist in relation to other people, to the rest of the universe, who themselves don't exist independently, intrinsically. So it's like this interconnected net where we're all in Tibetan Buddhism, they'll call it interdependent co-origination, that every part of the universe is evoking and being evoked by simultaneously every other part. And so how quantum physics, you see, so that's really this other sort of fundamental, kind of way of understanding what quantum physics is showing, because once you really take in that quantum physics is showing there's nothing objective, well, if this universe that we're in isn't objective, then what happened to the subject? What happened to us as a subject? I, as a subject, need an object to be in relationship to in order to be a subject. But when there's no objective anything, all of a sudden it sheds light on and puts into question, wait a second, who am I? And, so that's where, when I was saying before that quantum physics promotes itself to be a spiritual path, it's actually shedding light on the nature of ourselves.
Well, you go through your day, and I imagine, like everybody else, you have breakfast in the morning, you go to bed at night, you interact with people throughout the day. Most of the time, we carry out our business without concerning ourselves with the fact that it's all an illusion.
On one hand, it's an illusion, but not in the way we think it is, in a certain way. But, you play your role as if it's unbelievably important. And, so it's this weird paradox. And, the idea when you hear, because a lot of in Eastern tradition, you'll hear, oh, it's an illusion, or it's just a dream, and thereby it doesn't mean anything, or it's like this nihilistic point of view. No, it's not. That's not the proper way of understanding that. The illusion, so we actually, are projecting onto the ink blot. Like, think about what a dream is. It's an ink blot. It's a projection. It's a reflection. And so when we project onto the ink blot, it's not like we project onto the ink blot of the waking dream. We're just on an actual flat ink blot, and we project one moment, and 2 moments later we see the butterfly. No, the very moment we project, as viewed so appears, the very moment is that butterfly, if that's what we're projecting, actually will manifest. And, but the point is, we then react to that projection, in this case, the butterfly, as if it's actually objective. And then we become conditioned by our projection via our reaction to it. And that's the way we actually entrance ourselves, as compared to if you actually see that process and have the recognition that it's just like a dream that you've woken up in at night and having this lucid dream, that this world we're inhabiting is our own mind, that's really what quantum physics is potentially showing us.
It's a very deep insight, and I think it's difficult to grasp. You used at one point the metaphor of a magic mirror, that the universe is like a magic mirror reflecting ourselves back to us.
And that makes me think, all the wisdom traditions talk about that. I mean, interesting, etymologically, mirror means the holder of the shadow, but also in the apocryphal text, Christ says, and of course this got written out of the Bible, Christ says, I am a mirror to those that know me. Okay. Now the thing about a mirror, which is really interesting, it itself has no form. It's invisible. You would never see it without, if there are objects, then the objects actually get reflected via the mirror, and the reflections seemingly obscure the silvered surface of the mirror, but simultaneously they reveal it. You would never notice the mirror there without the reflections. It's like a psychedelic where, just like you take a psychedelic or a plant medicine, and over time it just comes on more and more and more. The more I've gone down the quantum physics, that rabbit hole, the more it's just expanded my consciousness and revealed the enormity of what it's offering us.
Well, if we go with the premise that every part of the universe is entangled or intimately connected with every other part of the universe, then we have to say to ourselves, I must be much more than just, as Alan Watts famously put it, a skin-encapsulated ego. That if I understand myself in terms of the wholeness of who I am, I'm much, much larger, vastly larger, infinitely larger.
I want to go back to that hidden treasure tradition in Tibetan Buddhism. It's actually called Terma, the Terma tradition. And it's actually, I do practice to a particular, this lineage. And that's the way the Terma, the hidden treasures, that's the way the lineage, in a sense, propagates itself over time and refreshes itself and keeps itself sort of vital and fresh. In that these hidden treasures, and the way that the tradition envisions it, is that there are these hidden treasures that are hidden, encoded within the fabric of the universe. Okay, in all different dimensions, in the earth, in our minds, just every element, all over the place. And it's very much like when you have a dream. Think about what a dream is. A dream is an expression of the unconscious, and a dream compensates a one-sidedness. So when we get overly one-sided and out of balance, all of a sudden we'll have a dream, and the dream will be a compensation. It'll, through symbols. Symbols are the language of dreams, and it'll actually present us with a particular symbol that if we actually have the recognition of the symbol and get into alignment with it, it will bring us back to ourselves. It'll help us to remember who we are and to get back in balance. Well, the thing with this, with the Terma, the hidden treasure tradition, it's exactly the same thing. So Tibetan Buddhism would say, oh yeah, whenever like the community of practitioners, when they get a little bit off balance or unconscious, or just they're in having this need of the next practice to do, or, or a particular blessing or something like that, all of a sudden, one of these treasures will manifest in the universe at exactly the right moment in time. And the person who is destined to discover it will actually bring it forth, and they'll be the one to find the treasure and to bring it forth to the community. And whether it's like a teaching or a prayer, and it's very much like a symbol that's crystallizing, out of the dream or into the dream. And it's offering us exactly what we need. Sort of like taking this like, a vitamin mineral that, is exactly that the universe naturally secretes so as to bring us back to ourselves. So why I talk about the Terma tradition, and I just given a few months ago this big talk about this, is that now I'm certainly no enlightened person. I have no authorization. I'm not one of those special people who discovers Terma, the hidden treasures. But I know about the tradition, and I know about quantum physics, and just my own personal opinion, I am absolutely 100% convinced that quantum physics is a modern day analog to a Terma, that we have literally dreamed up quantum physics into the world and into our minds to show ourselves, to remind ourselves, to help us remember who we are, to help us remember we're not a skin-encapsulated ego, like to make reference to that Alan Watts quote, but that who we are is much grander and larger, all of us. And this is, Christ himself was saying this in the Bible when he says, like, ye are gods, and scripture cannot be broken. And yeah, we all kind of intellectually have a sense, oh yeah, we have a divine part. But what I'm pointing out is that, one way of really interpreting quantum physics is that it's something that we collectively have dreamed up so as to help us to remember who we are.
One of the points you make is that since we know from quantum entanglement that the universe is an undivided whole, that if we are to best work with the universe, it's by getting in touch with our own undivided wholeness. And most of us are kind of fractured.
Yeah, and that goes back to that thing you were saying about like the typical corporate academic physicists. They're not necessarily spiritual practitioners, so the idea of, spiritual practitioner or just somebody who's psychologically fluent is somebody who's really prioritizing, becoming whole and the individuation process of becoming who they are. And so your typical physicist, just like the typical any person, isn't necessarily, that's not their priority. And so because they themselves aren't in touch with their own wholeness, in a sense, you can't really have the recognition of the wholeness of the quantum universe that is being reflected back. So you make a really important point that the way for us to really, say if we're a physicist, for really to do the best physics is simultaneously not just to study the outside world, but to understand that the outside world, being like a dream, is reflecting us, the inside world. And that if we do work on our inner process and connect with our wholeness, that actually helps for us to more clearly see the wholeness that's intrinsic to a quantum universe.
Yeah, I have many guests on this program and many viewers as well who would point out, and I think correctly so, that science, for all of its wonders and metaphysical beauty, has contributed to the pollution on the planet and to the oppression of people, that many people are very afraid of the fact that science, especially materialistic science, is becoming a dominant worldview to the detriment of life itself on the planet.
That's the thing that really concerns me, because that actually is seeing this universe, that the primary fundamental, whatever, like the level of the universe is materialist, physical. And that's a wrong view. That's what quantum physics is saying. By inquiring into the nature of the physical universe and trying to understand the building blocks of it, it discovered that there was nothing there, that there was nothing there other than one's mind, other than consciousness itself. You see, that's one way in. And this really, it so is in agreement with the deeper understandings in psychology, in with depth psychology, where through this synchronistic phenomena, and think about what a synchronicity, what it is. It's like, there's some sort of seemingly external event in the world that will manifest expressing the internal, the situation inside of our psyche, that the inner and the outer are somehow expressing or reflecting each other, which is to say that they're actually not separate. And keep in mind, what did Christ say in the apocryphal text? I think it's in the Gospel of Thomas. You enter the kingdom when you make the inner as the outer. Well, what's a situation where the inner is the outer? It's a dream. What is a dream? It's like the inner psyche of the dreamer is getting elaborated and expressed via the medium of the outside world, the seemingly outside world of the dream. So the idea being that, whether you're talking from the psychological point of view with synchronicities or from the physics point of view, the point is that quantum physics is actually shedding light on that mind and matter are not separate. You see, we've been entranced through the materialistic viewpoint to think, there's the physical world and then there's consciousness and the two are separate. Well, if you remember, quantum physics is saying this universe is quantum through and through and there's a wholeness. There's no separate parts. It's not like physical matter and consciousness are interacting like they're two separate entities. No, they're one and the same thing, and to see that all of a sudden, how can you possibly see that? Only by having an expansion of consciousness. And one way of describing that expansion of consciousness is that you're beginning to see the dreamlike nature of reality. You're beginning to wake up. And when you see the dreamlike nature of reality, that's like this other way of saying you're beginning to tap into your agency, to your creative power that we wield every moment in actually creating our experience. Because think about it. Quantum physics discovered the way we set up our experiment, the questions we asked, how we interpreted the data determined what answers we were getting back, and 100 years ago when they first encountered this, it was so off their radar because they had been entranced that this world was objective and they were just trying to study it. But in the two-slit experiment, that was the classic experiment, or, that was that was like the experiment that, all of the revelations of quantum physics, in a sense, have been said to be enfolded within the double-slit experiment, because that was the experiment that consciousness entered the physics lab, and they haven't been able to get rid of it since. It's not going away. It's the skeleton in their closet. And, it's something that's demanding to be taken seriously.
If everybody had this revelation that you're describing, we wouldn't have worker bees in our culture, individuals who show up at the factory every day or the meatpacking plant, or if everybody saw themselves from this magical, mystical perspective, it strikes me our economy would have to be very, very different. Our whole world might look very, very different than it looks today.
Yeah, no, totally. And, so it makes me think. Jung talks about that oftentimes the unconscious will create an unbelievably potentially fatal situation. We will dream ourselves into a corner right at the edge of a cliff. And, but that's what we need to actually access, the parts of us that are the best, most genius, creative parts. And I would say when you view our world as if it's a dream, you actually see that we who are the dreamers, we're dreaming ourselves into a corner or the edge of a cliff, or, in this incredibly dark place where we're, just destroying ourselves and, invoking this catastrophe. But yet, then there's quantum physics, which is offering us the medicine. And if we were to actually take that in, what that would look like is that each and every one of us would connect with our creative agency and our creative power. And then we would realize, particularly when you connect with other people who are also having this realization, oh my God, that we're having a collective dream and this universe is manifesting this way because we've all been conditioned and we've all been entrained and we've hypnotized ourselves to think with these limited beings. And why this universe is manifesting in such a problematic, limited, fearful way is because that's the way we've been conditioning ourselves and been conditioned to dream it. And as one person and two and 10 and 100, we wake up out of that spell and connect with our creative agency, not only the economy, but the whole world. We can actually recreate the world in a way that's much more in alignment with who we're discovering ourselves to be, which is that we're not separate from each other, that we're interdependent and interconnected, and we depend on each other for our survival and well-being. And what I'm pointing out is we're actually being invited to participate in our own evolution. Okay. And keep in mind, when I say quantum physics is a terma, it's just a terma. There's many, many termas. The coronavirus pandemic is also a revelation. It's also a hidden treasure if you view it in a certain way. Everything and anything is a hidden treasure. This universe is a living oracle, and it's speaking symbolically. And just remember, symbols are the language of dreams. And what I'm pointing at is when you see the dreamlike nature and you stabilize yourself in that perspective, as viewed, so appears. The more you see the dreamlike nature, the more this universe will reveal its dreamlike nature. And the more it reveals its dreamlike nature, the more stabilized and strengthened you are in having that realization. But particularly when you connect with other people who are having that realization, it's what I call we can dream ourselves awake. Okay. We can conspire to co-inspire each other, that's a real conspiracy theory. And we can activate the genius, the collective genius that's latent in all of us. Particularly, this is the idea in Buddhism. They talk about the triple jewel, the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, the teacher, the teaching, and the Sangha is the community of fellow practitioners. And, and I think about in Buddhism, they talk about that who we are these bodhisattvas in training. And my favorite sort of translation of bodhisattva, it's a being in the process of awakening. And that's all of us. And when you connect with other beings in the process of awakening and you put like what we're realizing together, like I'm saying, you can activate the collective genius, dream ourselves awake, conspire to co-inspire, however you want to say it. As an artist, I'm actually creating an art happening called Global Awakening. And anybody can join, free membership, and we're creating it as we literally, once we realize what's available to us, because if I could just say one thing about that is so inspiring about quantum physics to me, and keep in mind, some of the greatest quantum physicists are saying that when they would get depressed, there would be two go-tos. There would be, I'd listen to like Beethoven, or because they were classical, into music, that form of music, or whatever your favorite form of music is, or I would contemplate quantum physics to be an antidepressant. And here's an example of how inspiring quantum physics can be. That quantum entity, like I was saying before it's observed, it exists in every and any state that it possibly could. And then you observe it, wave function collapses, it actualizes into a particular manifestation. All the other possibilities, they vaporize, they go into a parallel world, however you want to phrase it. But the point is, and it's not me saying this, these are the founding fathers saying this, that even if one of those possibilities of that quantum entity is highly, ridiculously, incredibly unlikely, it could be the way the universe manifests this very moment. Okay? So if we get entranced in pessimism and thinking, it's so easy to just feel like, oh my God, I feel all this despair and depression and things seem so dark in the world. And if you get hooked by a pessimistic point of view, as viewed so appears by the power of dreaming, you're going to invoke all the evidence you need to confirm the objective truth of your viewpoint, your pessimistic viewpoint. And then you're actually part of the problem. Then you're actually invoking and creating the very thing you're afraid of. But what quantum physics is saying is that even that highly ridiculously unlikely possibility, such as what if sufficient number of human beings wake up to actually catalyze a collective global awakening? Quantum physics says that is absolutely in the realm of possibility. And if you're not envisioning that, then I would ask, what are you thinking?
One way to think of that is that an event might be so improbable that it only occurs once in the whole history of the universe, but that's what happens every moment.
Exactly. And then once you establish yourself in that viewpoint, the realm of the possible just expands to the point where you're like holding, the nature of your experience and the nature of this universe that we're inhabiting and the nature of ourselves and our own possibilities and potentialities in such an expanded way that can only help.
Yeah. Well, it strikes me that, as you said in the beginning of the book, you're writing the book as an act of ceremonial magic. And if the message here seems to be that we all have the potential to be magicians, it's up to us to be good magicians.
Yeah. Because that was one of the things that some of the founding fathers were concerned. They were recognizing, oh my God, we're tapping into the energy of tapping into the atom with atomic energy. They were realizing, oh my God, that's the palest reflection of the energy we're tapping into with reference to the psyche, to the incredible creative energy that quantum physics was beginning, to access. And they were concerned, going, oh my God, this energy, it could be used for good or evil, And I hate to say it, but there's powers that be. A lot of the revelations of quantum physics have been kept from the public, because, and whether this is consciously or not, that if sufficient number of people got switched on to what quantum physics is saying, and keep in mind, the physicists who were getting turned on to this they were lamenting, going, it's a pity, it's a tragedy that not more people are switched on to the insights of quantum physics, because it's basically like this magic wand that's fallen from heaven. And it's actually, showing us the incredible power that all of us have. And one way of understanding that, a beautiful image, this one physicist, he uses this image. He says, imagine if you've never seen an automobile and you come across an automobile and you have no idea what it's about. And you turn on the turn signals or the windshield wiper or the lights or the radio, and it all seems kind of cool. But the idea is, that's not quite the central point. You don't quite know what it's really about until you actually turn it on and drive the car. Then that physicist is saying that's our relationship to quantum physics. We've developed, transistors or lasers or computers. That's like turning on the turn signal in the car. But we haven't figured out the central idea. And he is convinced that the central idea is unbelievably simple. And when we actually see it, we're going to hit ourselves on the head going, how could I have been so blind? And, for so long. And I'm presenting that the central idea, very, very simply, is that we're having a collective dream. Now, keep in mind, I'm not talking in the metaphorical way, saying this is like a dream. I remember years ago, I had this very eminent Tibetan translator, this Westerner, come over. We had tea, and we got into a little debate, and he was saying, no, the teachings of the Dharma is saying this is like a dream. And I was going, no, the teachings of the Dharma are saying this is a dream. This isn't like a dream. It's not metaphorical. And I'm convinced I'm right. But, it was very friendly, argument. And so I'm basically, offering the perspective. And I feel like, saying to people, don't take my word for it. Do the experiment yourself. Just like the Buddha was saying when he examined his mind and he discovered who he was. He wasn't wanting people who just unthinkingly followed him or believed him. He was wanting people to do the experiment yourself. And the idea being to really do the experiment moment by moment of the nature of your own experience, of the nature of your mind. And you begin, in Tibetan Buddhism, they'll talk about the emptiness, the Buddha nature. And in the book, I talk about that the Buddha really had discovered exactly what quantum physics has discovered. He discovered it, 2,500 years ago. But I point out that they map onto each other precisely, that it's the same realization. And, that's really the simple and central idea that I'm pointing at, that any of us can discover if you just inquire into quantum physics, into the nature of your experience. That is, that we're having a collective dream. And when you actually stabilize that realization and connect with other people who are also realizing that, we can change the dream we're having. And that's not new age, woo-woo, flaky, fluffy stuff. That's the hardest core of hardcore science.
Well, Paul Levy, once again, this has been a very inspirational conversation. It's a deep, profound message. It's taken our culture a century to begin to digest these findings from quantum physics. And I think you've done an excellent job of making it very clear. I encourage our viewers to take a look at your book, The Quantum Revelation. Thank you so much, Paul, for being with me.
Jeffrey, it is totally my pleasure. Thank you so much.
And for those of you watching, thank you for being with us. New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at CIHS You can now download all 9 copies of the New Thinking Aloud magazine for free or order beautiful printed copies. Go to newthinkingaloud.org.
Book 4 in the New Thinking Aloud dialogue series is Charles T. Tart, 70 Years of Exploring Consciousness and Parapsychology, now available on Amazon.
For early access to our videos and live stream events, sign up for our free weekly newsletter at newthinkingaloud.org.